All right, let's pull everybody back together and let's talk about the purpose of miracles. This is a really key part of the argument, and so we need to spend some time just understanding what miracles are and the purpose of miracles, so on and so forth. Now, it's a very common situation in life to be uncertain as to if a message really is from somebody or not, okay? This happens in life. It's been happening for centuries to know if a message really is from the person it claims to be or it's not. I think I've told you before, I really enjoy watching the TV show on the History Channel, Pawn Stars, right? Where they've got a pawn store in Las Vegas and people bring them all these old artifacts and letters that claim to be from Marilyn Monroe, or maybe a diary that claims to be from Abraham Lincoln, or all these things that claim to be from famous historical figures. And there's always difficulty to know, okay, is this really from them? Is this really a letter that was signed by, let's say, JFK? How do we know it was really from him? And that's the intrigue of the show. They bring in experts and they try to figure out, is this autograph legitimate? Was this really signed by Michael Jordan or whatever? I enjoy that TV show. But it's the same problem, right, that we are wrestling with here, right? How do we know that a message really is from the person it claims to be from? How do we know a message really is from God or not? Now, you would think in our everyday when we find ourselves in these everyday situations, you would think that technology would have improved such that we wouldn't have this problem as much. But in fact, it seems like technology has almost made it more difficult, made it worse, because it's those who are trying to trick us, right, use the technology to counterfeit things. I don't know if you've ever had your identity stolen, or what happened to me a couple years ago is I had my wallet stolen, and the crooks, the people who stole it, within 10 minutes had racked up $6,000 in charges on all my credit cards and debit cards before I even knew my wallet was gone. They stole it out of my car. And so I had to be on the phone, as you can imagine, the nightmare, being on the phone with banks and credit card companies, trying to prove to them that I really was who I claimed to be and that these other charges were fraudulent, right? Now, thankfully, the banks and the credit card companies took care of us and it was all fine. We didn't have to pay for all of those fraudulent charges. But it took time to convince them that I was really Adam Johnson and these other people weren't. So we've got all sorts of technology, PIN numbers, right? Fingerprints, signatures, all these personal questions that only you should know about. What's your mother's maiden name? What was the name of your first pet? All these tricks that we try to use to verify that somebody really is who they claim to be, or that somebody's message really is from them. So this is a problem that we face not only in this religious area, how do we know a message is really from God or not? This is a problem we face a lot in various ways. It's not a new problem either. In the past, in ancient history, this was a problem as well. So think about, for example, a king. Think about a king, and a king wants to put forth various laws, various decrees, right? Wants to communicate messages to his people that he rules as the monarch, right? But you can imagine, and this did in fact happen, some unscrupulous character comes along, puts together a document that claims to be from the king but really isn't, and takes that document into a village, and let's say the decree or the document says to pay him 20% in taxes. And so this unscrupulous individual takes all this money from the village, claiming that the king is requesting it because he's forged a document to make it look like it's from the king, but it really isn't. So kings in the past faced this issue, and what did they do? Well, kings, and this is very common, what they did is they put together some sort of seal which helped prove that a message really was from the king. Usually the seal was done in wax, either to seal the message, seal the paper, or the seal was imprinted on the message itself. So people could see the seal and know, oh, this is official. This really is from the king. And so this wax seal was a very common method. Now think about what this seal had to be like in order to accomplish the purpose it was supposed to accomplish. It had to be unique, right? It couldn't be something that others could easily copy. So it had to be unique, difficult to replicate. It had to be something that was easily recognizable, right? It had to be something where when somebody saw it, they were like, oh, I recognize that. That's from the king. So it had to be easily recognizable, and it had to be something that only the king could do. And so often the king would wear the seal on a ring that only he would have then, like a signet ring. The seal then only the king could do, so it was unique, easily recognizable, and something only the king had. Now, miracles perform almost exactly the same function. The purpose of miracles is almost exactly the same purpose as these ancient seals that kings would use. Think about it for a moment. Miracles, the very purpose of miracles are to help provide evidence that a message really is from God. Because they are, just like a king's seal, miracles are unique, right? They're easily recognizable, and there's something that only God can do. And so miracles perform the very purpose of God doing miracles or giving somebody the ability to do miracles is to authenticate that they really have messages from God. So we can take this information and lay it out in more of a formal argument as follows. And this is what I would say is our main argument that Jesus' message really is from God. This is the number one strongest argument that we have. So we can start out premise one. If somebody claims to have messages from God, we would have good reason to believe their messages really were from God if they could perform miracles. Premise two, we have good historical evidence that Jesus claimed to have messages from God and performed miracles. Therefore, we have good, strong, confident reasons to believe Jesus' message is from God. So I refer to this argument or this subject as the miracle test. So I will often, if you hear me talk or watch my videos on YouTube and such, I often call this the miracle test. And I think the miracle test is the best test that we have to try to ascertain whether a message really is from God or not. This miracle test. Now we need to talk maybe just a minute here about the definition of a miracle. There's a lot written about how to specifically define a miracle, and I think a lot of that is a waste of time. I think it's pretty obvious when you see a miracle, right? We use the term a little bit too loosely, right, in our common everyday conversations. So you hear people say something like, oh, I witnessed my child being born. Wasn't that a miracle? Yeah, yes and no. I don't want to be that guy, right? Actually. But in a sense, really, that's not a miracle, not in the sense that we're using it here. That would be more of how God works providentially in His created order to accomplish incredible things, but that's not miraculous, right? So sometimes we just need to be a little bit more careful with our language so we don't confuse people. So if we want to be more technical, I think we could say that a miracle is an impressive act which couldn't occur naturally, okay? Now if you gave birth to your child and then the baby flew around the room by itself and started speaking 20 different languages, then I would grant that that was miraculous. An impressive act which couldn't occur naturally. We know a miracle when we see it. It's one of those things when you see it, you know it's a miracle. I'm talking about these grandiose things that are just unmistakable. The most classic example, I think, is Moses parting the Red Sea. That's just not something that would occur naturally. It's an obvious exception to the regular course of how the world works. Now, I do want to clarify something about this miracle test before we go on. Follow me with this, because this is a little bit, you'll see where I'm going eventually, but the first statement might shock you. We don't need the Bible to know about the miracle test, okay? We don't need the Bible to know about the miracle test. I think this miracle test is something that's very intuitive. I think virtually anybody you talk to is going to grant you that the miracle test is probably the strongest way that we can know if something is from God or not. This actually came up in one of my debates. I debated an atheist, Dan Barker, a couple years ago at an atheist conference down in Florida. So just imagine a room full of 300-400 atheists at an atheist conference, and I'm debating an atheist up on the stage, and he affirmed the miracle test. He brought it up. I didn't bring it up in the debate. I mean, you can watch it. It's on the Convincing Proof YouTube channel. But he brought up the miracle test as follows. He said, Adam, I don't believe that there's a God, but I think the moderator asked him what would convince him that there is a God. And the atheist, Dan Barker, turned to me and he said, Adam, if you could prophesy, if you could tell me that an asteroid would fall in my yard, and you could tell me the exact weight of the asteroid tomorrow and the exact time that it would land in my yard, then I would believe that your God is real. And I was like, wow. First of all, I can't do that because I'm not a prophet. But I thought to myself, well, this is impressive because he is affirming the miracle test, as I often use it. In a sense, saying that, look, if a miraculous thing can be performed, that is strong evidence that there is a God or that God is speaking. And so the vast majority of people are going to be aware of the miracle test intuitively and understand it intuitively. So it's not something that we need the Bible for, to know and understand the miracle test. However, the Bible does talk about the miracle test quite often. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. So it's similar to like murder, right? We don't need the Bible to know that murder is wrong, right? We would say that that's something God has written on our hearts. The moral law, Romans 2 explains that, right? People don't need the Bible to know that murder is wrong. However, the Bible also does say that murder is wrong, right? So similarly, we don't need the Bible to know about the miracle test, but if we look in the Bible, it does affirm the miracle test. So probably the most classic example, and we just studied this, Dustin just took us through this in Exodus 4, how the Bible starts off, in a sense. The very first author of the Bible, Moses, the very first time he heard from God, he was a bit concerned. He said, God, what if they don't believe me? What if I go to the Israelites or I go to Pharaoh and they say, well, you didn't really hear from God. Your message really isn't from God. I think that was a legitimate concern. And so what did God provide Moses? Well, he gave him evidence. He gave him evidence to show people that he really had a message from God. God used that term, the term evidence. We translate it in English, I know, but the point is that God gave him evidence in the form of miracles. So here you got an example of the miracle test. That's the primary purpose of miracles. The Bible refers to them as God's signature, similarly to in our modern day writing documents, mortgage papers, contracts, signatures, to know that we're really the one who is signing this or doing this particular message. The Bible calls miracles God's fingerprint. What about Jesus? Is it appropriate to take Jesus through this miracle test? Well, Jesus told us to. Jesus said, look, if I'm not doing my Father's works, in this context he's talking about miracles, don't believe me. But if I am doing them and you don't believe me, look at the works. In other words, if you don't know if I'm really from the Father, if I really have a message from God or not, look at my works, look at my miracles, and then this way you'll know that I and the Father are one. Jesus also said when John the Baptist was having doubts, remember this is John the Baptist, the guy that announced Jesus to the world as the Messiah who takes away the sins of the world. Later in life, John the Baptist had doubts when he was in prison about to be beheaded. He sent messengers to Jesus and asked, "Are you really the one? Are you really the Messiah?" And look how Jesus replied. He said, "Look at what I'm accomplishing. Look at, in other words, my miracles. Take me through the miracle test," as I'm paraphrasing it. Look at the miracles I'm accomplishing, and then you'll know I really am from God. And the rest of the New Testament goes through that as well. Here's just another example from Acts 2, explaining that Jesus was attested to us by God through miracles, wonders, and signs. And that is the purpose of miracles, to authenticate a message really is from God. We see that all the way out throughout the Old Testament and New Testament. That's the purpose of miracles. So Jesus claimed he had a message from God, and that his miracles provide good evidence that his message, in fact, really is from God. Now, as we know, part of Jesus' message is that God is a Trinity and that he is one of the divine persons of the Trinity. So in a sense, you can use this argument to make the case that Jesus is God, right? And that's legitimate. I often do that as well. But here we're just focusing on Jesus' message being from God. And if it is, then that entails that he is in fact God himself, one of the divine persons of the Trinity, because that's part of his message. This isn't a new argument. Obviously, this isn't new to me. This is how people have argued for centuries that the Bible really is from God, that Jesus' message really is from God. I'll just give you one example of a key thinker from history who made this case, John Locke. You might be familiar with him, one of the major thinkers of the Enlightenment in the 1700s. He made a case for Christianity. In this particular book, The Reasonableness of Christianity is delivered in the Scriptures, and explained, just like I did this morning, that miracles are the hallmark of the divine and are crucial in establishing whether something is really a message from God or not.